Hi guys, my name is Matthew. This is a tutorial to teach you the fundamentals of Bubble by building a simple local marketplace app from scratch. So if you've had very little or no experience with Bubble before, my intention with this tutorial is to show you how easy it is to actually build a fully functioning web application in not that much time. And what we're going to be building is a notice board for climate change volunteer opportunities, but that's not really the interesting part. The interesting part is that this app that we're going to build is just going to serve as a template for a general marketplace application. Marketplace application being one where you have buyers and sellers, or any two actors really who are looking to trade with one another in some shape or form. It doesn't have to be monetary trade. And so my intention is to show you how you could go about building such an application so you can think about how you would build it in your own context, because I'm sure you have in your mind some web application or applications that you would like to bring to life, and that's probably why you're watching this video in the first place. And so I hope that when you walk away from this video you feel empowered to go out on your own and build those applications using what you've learned here as a solid foundation. So let's crack into it. All right, to start, once you've created a Bubble account, you will find yourself on your homepage, which has a list of all of the apps that you've created. If you haven't created any, obviously you won't see any. So to create a new one, we click this button over here called New App, and we'll call this our red line. I think I have some reason an apostrophe over my O. And by clicking on Create a New App, Bubble will do the work to generate a new editor for us where we can work on our app. And when you create an app for the first time, you'll be seeing with this, the application assistant just prompts you for some answers, things like if you want to connect a domain name, if you want to name your app, if you want to really give it some information to accept payments, this kind of thing. It can be useful. For now, we'll start with a blank page and we'll close the assistant. And this is where we find ourselves first. So the Bubble editor is made up of a few different windows, which you'll find on the left-hand side here. Today we'll be talking mostly, if not exclusively, about design, workflow, and data. So we'll start with the design tab, because that's where you're going to be spending most of your time with your app, most likely. The design tab is just where you drag and drop elements onto a screen. So I've grabbed a text element from the side here, and each element has this little dialog box where you can edit various components. And so, for example, this text box, if I type in here, our red line, let's say, and I can change the size of that font by either choosing a pre-selected style, just like you would in any sort of Word document, or the other way is to actually not select any style explicitly by clicking this blank bit up here, and then you get a little bit more granular control over the font size and the type of font, all this kind of stuff. For now, we'll just leave it as it is. So this can kind of serve as a bit of a crude heading for our page right now. And you'll see that if we actually preview our app already at this stage, then we'll just be presented with a blank page with this text on it. So if I click preview on that right hand side, which is how you generate a preview of your app, you'll see this is what our app currently looks like. Obviously no interactivity, no anything, because we've only got this one text element. The other quick thing to note right now, you'll notice this grid on the screen. That's extremely useful for keeping your design tidy on the fly, because if you go into the grids and borders menu up here and you look down here, you'll see that there's some options that say snap elements to grid, snap elements to edges and grid. And all that means is that if you have a new element, it will obviously just snap to be aligned with the grid. Or if it's elements and grid, then it can actually snap to the edges of another element too. So that's just one thing sort of I like to have on all the time. You can turn it off, You can change the size of the boxes. You can even change the color. So get a little bit of control over there. It's good to try to keep your app design tidy. Don't necessarily need to design it from the get-go. Generally, it's a good idea to work on the functionality of your app first, and then tidy up the design later. But it can hinder the design of the functionality if in fact your app is a mess. So grid is a good way to keep it tidy. So starting on this app, if we're thinking from the perspective of somebody who's using it, the first thing that they might want to do, if they are somebody who wants to create a volunteer opportunity, is input the information about their volunteering position. So the way that Bubble allows a user to give information to the application is using input fields. So input fields are another type of element that we'll find on this left-hand menu by scrolling down. And there's a lot of different types of input forms, and we'll cover a few of them today. We'll start with the most basic one. That's just a box which, if you preview your app, you'll see it just allows the user to type something. You'll also notice that this type here text disappears when I type. That's placeholder text. And that's something that you can change within the app. So I could say here, position title, to sort of prompt the person who's going to input the information about the position that they're posting about, to give that particular piece of information into this particular input. Another way to keep your inputs labeled is just to have a little text box over the top. So I could say, what's the name of the position? And the text is being cut off, so we can drag it along. And now we have a nice little way. And if I refresh this page by clicking up here, whenever you make changes to your app, you need to refresh the preview. Otherwise Bubble might not handle the app correctly. So you'll see that this is now sort of a good starting point for a web form for the person who's created a volunteer position post to input their information. So we'll create another one over here for the organization that they're from. One way to quickly create elements of the same type is just to control drag. And if you do that, it'll just duplicate the element that you've dragged. So here we want to say the position, so the position title will go, I forgot how to spell the word organization for a second there. We can do the same with our text box. What's the name of your organization? And now we probably want to get the rest of the information about the position. So somebody might already want to specify what's actually involved, sort of a description of the tasks that you would do in such a position. So we can make this one say sort of something like what tasks does this position entail? And obviously that reads a little bit dry, but you can change the copy to your heart's content. That's more of a user experience question. So what tasks does this position entail? And you can say, list all of the various things you need someone to do. Now, you might already have noticed this is quite a small text input form for somebody who wants to list all of the various pieces of information. So instead of using this input, we instead might want to use the multi-line input, which allows somebody to type a lot more within the input. So just to show you, if I sort of go to the end of this, it'll just drag across like that. Rather in here, I'm allowed to space and everything like that. Here, spaces don't work. Enter doesn't work to create a new line. So we want to use a multi-line input. Since we've already configured this one easy way to just change this into a multi-line input is to right-click and go replace by another element. And you can only do this with elements of the same type. So you can't replace an input form with a text element, but you can replace it with a different type of input. So we'll replace this with a multi-line, and Bubble has generated it up there. So we'll just drag it back down. In fact, it didn't quite work as expected, so I just Control Z then to undo. You also have your undo, redo buttons up here. We'll just retype that text. So what are all the things you want someone in this position to do? Okay. Another thing that we might want to specify is how many hours you would expect somebody to have to devote to such an hour. So how many hours does this position require? And we could make this an input, a sort of standard input form as well. But it might be nice to get a little bit of standard, create a kind of a common standard among the answers that people might give. So we're going to use a drop down instead for this. And a drop down allows us to actually specify what answers people can give. So we give them a pre-configured list to choose from. So with a drop down, you can just add in a whole bunch of static choices. And we'll cover the difference between static and dynamic in due course. But for now, just know that here we can just create a list of all of the options that we want a user to be able to select. So for example, we could start with less than 3 hours a week, maybe between 3 to 6 hours a week. To keep this a little simple and short, I won't list a million different options, but we could say, between 10, 20 a week, and it's a little inconsistent here, 3 to 6 hours a month, but you can create as many of these as you want. And when you, as a user, encounter the drop down, it just behaves like you would expect it to. You can select an option just like that. The other thing, 2 more things I think would be useful here to make the posting of the volunteer position a little more appealing. We might want to add a picture. So add an image to your post. So that allows the person creating this to upload their own image. And because we're taking information from the user and plugging it into the application, that always means we need an input form. Well, not always. You can, of course, connect up to APIs and this kind of thing too to get information from other services, but that's a story for another day. For now, we'll use our picture uploader, drag it in here, and there's a few things we can configure here. Of course, the placeholder. We can have an image already sort of there as almost as a placeholder image actually. That once the user clicks on it, it will disappear, and they'll have the option to upload their own. So just to see how that works, you can click this, and you'll enter your browser where you can upload a picture. The last thing that we want, I think, is a way to specify the location of this volunteering position. Just as presuming that it's in a physical location. If it was a remote position, then we'd create that option as well. But let's just, for the sake of simplicity, imagine that it's a physical location-based volunteering position. So you say, where is this opportunity located? Where is this volunteering opportunity located? And instead of using an input form, and instead of using a drop-down, which we can't list all the million different locations that there are, we have this very handy feature within the search box input. So if we draw a search box here, Bubble will actually, and I believe it does this by connecting to Google services. A search box, when configured correctly, can actually allow us to search for pieces of information that are already within our application, or it can pull information from Google via the geographic places choices style. And this is super simple to set up and extremely powerful, because if I start typing here Amsterdam, you'll see that I get all of these options, and you can go really granular. You can go down to the street level as well. You know, for now we'll just click Amsterdam, and that's going to be really nice, because that information we can even plug into a map later on if we want to, and it's also just a bit nicer from a user experience point of view, because it auto fills. I don't have to type, you know, completely my address. So now we have all these input forms, and you know, it's a pretty good start. I want to just breach one good practice at this point that you should keep in mind, and that's use the hell out of groups. We have at the moment just put all of these sort of disparate elements on our page, and if we look up here at the elements tree, this will show us all of the different elements that we have, and you see it's quite messy. If we kept adding elements to this page, it would be really, really hard to keep a track of things. And you know, it also means that if we wanted to add something else down here, that meant we want all of this to be moved up, well then we'd have to sort of individually, we'd have to sort of control click to select multiple things and drag them up, and you know, that's going to be a nightmare. So instead we want to group similar elements together, and you have under here the containers submenu, where you can create various types of groups. The most basic one is just a container, which if you create it, you are able to drag elements inside of it. When it highlights red, that means the element you're dragging will be put into the group upon your release of the mouse. And now you can drag that around, and you'll also see that these elements are now nested in the elements tree under this group A that we've just created. To access the parameters of any element, i.e. access that little dialog box that we've been using this whole time, you double click on an element. So that shows us the group. And groups are something we're going to talk a bit about in this video, because that's what allows us to pass information that we create or that users create around our application in a really kind of intuitive way. So for now we'll just undo this, because rather than create a group and then drag all these elements incorrectly, we're going to use a little trick to do this even easier. If we control click and multiple select similar elements, or different elements rather, and then right click, we have this option, group elements in a group, and that'll just automatically create a group for us. So that's a really, really sort of handy way. And we can do this for all of these elements, just so that we keep the title and the inputs together. It's going to make it easy for us in the future, and you do want to do things like that. You do want to think like, I'm going to have to maintain this website, I'm going to have to change it. So while it might take a little bit more time to do it now, it's a really small investment for the time that you're going to save later on. What I also like to do is group everything in the page in one sort of master group. So all of these groups here and the text I want to have within one group, and that keeps it very tidy for me, and it also keeps the group separate from the page. And I'll show you why that's valuable in a minute. So if I control click all of these elements and then I group them in a group, now I have this group G, which isn't a very intuitive name, so we should change it. We haven't talked about naming groups or naming elements yet, but if you do click up the top of the dialog box, you have the option to change it. So I'll just call it main for now. It's sort of the way that I do things. And now we have this main group, which is actually separate from the page. So main has its own parameters, but if we double click on the page itself, which is by default the index page, we'll also see a dialog pop up for the page. So the page is essentially your first group. It behaves just like a group, but it's technically not a group. There is, you can run into a little bit of confusion when you're passing things around your application. And just for me, it works to keep all my elements in a group that's separate from my page. It makes things just a little bit easier for me to manipulate. So that's just one, quick, good practice tip that I'll share already at this stage. But back to the functionality. So we now have the opportunity for somebody to input all the information that they have about a particular volunteering position. But if you go onto that page, it's not really clear what I have to do to sort of trigger the sending of that information. And you probably won't be surprised to know the way that you can do that is with a button. So if you didn't see it already, you have a button element over here, and we can drag that down the bottom of our box, and we can give it a name like create volunteer listing. And upon somebody clicking this button, we want our application to basically take all of this information in such a way that it can present it later on to somebody who's searching for volunteer opportunities. So I'm gonna have to now explain how Bubble handles data for us to really understand how this works. If you look at this diagram right here, we have our input forms as the vehicle for taking information from the user and collecting it essentially within our application. So those are essentially the windows into our house, or the letterbox. We've got different shaped letterboxes for different types of packages of information that we want to collect. We had a picture or an image shaped one for the image that we uploaded. We have a text, multiple text-based shapes. And so that's all good, those parcels or packages can be now passed into the house, but now we need a way to organize them once they're in our possession. So that's what the database is for. We need to sort of set up the shelving units in our house and pre-configure them so that we can very easily take the packages of information that were being passed and organize them. And have them ready to serve and present to people who are asking for that information later on. So within your database, you might have multiple different types of shelving units of different sort of sizes, depending on the type of thing that they are holding. So in our case, we just want one type of thing at the moment, and it's a job listing. And a job listing is sort of that's the object itself that we want to store. But it has all of these sort of subcategories of information. So maybe to keep our filing analogy alive, the volunteer listing is a folder, and we need to tell or at least we need to label the slots or the sleeves within that folder to expect certain bits of information or certain types of information. So within the database, we can create a folder as follows. If we go back to our editor now, and we go into our data tab, here is where we can create a new data type, or in our analogy, a new folder. So this new type we might want to call simply listing, and we create it. You'll see that, of course, there is already a user data type here. Bubble by default sets up the application to handle users, and users is not something we're going to talk about in this video, but they are really important, and I will cover them in a different video. For now, we'll just focus on the data type listing that we just created. So now we have the folder. Now we need to configure the sleeves of the folder, where the information actually goes inside of it. And those sleeves inside of the folder are called fields. And that's where we're going to put things like the position title, the image, the tasks, the location, all of these things. So we need to label those sleeves now ahead of time so that we can easily file away the information as we receive it. So I want to create those fields using this button here, and name them, and then say what type of information they can expect. So you know, the first one might be position title, and I'm using this this formatting of when there's multiple words, you make the first part of the word lowercase and the letter, and then every subsequent word starting with an uppercase letter. And that's actually not sure officially, you know, or originally where that came from, but that's commonly used in JavaScript for naming variables. Don't even know about that right now. It's just a way to keep things tidy and readable. So, and also the type of information that we want to store within this field is text, because that's what we're getting from the user. It's just, you know, it could be social media manager or whatever. It's coming in as text. And, you know, looking at our diagram again, you'll see that that folder now, or that field, I'm going to stick with using the word field now, that field is nested within the data type or the folder. And we can create as many of these fields as we want within one data type. That way, when information comes in from the outside world or from the user, we can just slot that information directly into the folders and rather the data types and their fields as they come in. So we'll name the other ones here too. We had position title, we had organization, which was another text. We had location. Location is an interesting one because we can actually store this as a geographic address, and that allows us to plug that information later into things like Google Maps element, and have that geographic address be translated into a marker on the map. So we'll save that as an address because it's going to come in as an address. We had, of course, tasks, which was another text. We had time commitment. That is coming via a drop down, so not a traditional input, but it's still coming in as text. So we're gonna save that also as text. And the last thing I believe we had was a image. And that one, you won't be surprised to know, is coming in as an image field type. So now we have our listing data type configured with all of these fields within it that are gonna, you know, they're ready, they're primed to accept information that the user is giving us. The only thing now, to look at our diagram one more time, is we need to actually connect explicitly the input forms that we already created on the page to the database. In other words, we need to tell the input fields that you need to, or we need to tell our application, take the information from those input fields, pick it up, carry it over, and put it into the fields of our listing data type. So we need to make that connection explicit. And that's what we're going to work on now. So if I now go back into my editor, you'll recall the last thing that we did here was create this button, and this button is going to be the catalyst for collecting the information that the user has provided, and that takes us to the last main area of Bubble, which is the workflow tab. Now, the workflow tab is quite simply just where you add behavior to your application. And obviously, taking information from one source and plugging it into your database, well, that's an action. That's a type of behavior that we want our application to do. So all of that kind of work is done within the workflow tab. And every sort of string of behavior, it always starts with an event. You know, something happens and then the application is gonna sort of take all of these subsequent actions. And that thing, that catalyzing event, is of course the clicking of the button. So we can just simply start by clicking here to add an event. And if we go into the Elements submenu, we have this option, an element is clicked. And now we get this little option here to add an action. So that's basically saying, you know, once this element is clicked, once this button is clicked, what do you want me to do next? We have to configure the event to say, just to specify what type or what specific element we want. We want to trigger this workflow when clicked, so we can select the option button down here. You'll see this is something that, you know, this is one of the strongest design features of Bubble, I think, is that it provides you always the most relevant information at the stage of the app or the stage of the logic that you're trying to build, and at that time. So we don't have to remember, excuse me, we don't have to remember that we have a button called Create Volunteer Listing. It automatically is populated in this list. So now we have this event set up, and we can now configure the actions. One very quick diversion at this stage. Another way to create events, which I use, it's for me a lot more intuitive. So if I just deleted that workflow, if we open up the dialog for a particular element, I can actually click this button here, go Start Edit Workflow, and then this event button Create Volunteer is clicked will automatically be generated. Bubble is very sort of intuitively telling us, you know, how this is going to work. When this button is clicked, then we're going to do a particular action. So that action is going to have to be, going back to our diagram one more time, that's going to have to be, how do we string the input to the data type field? So the submenu that we want to start looking for this is going to be data. And at the moment, we don't actually have any listings. So those folders don't actually exist yet. So that the first step that we have to do is actually create that folder or that data type. So we're going to click here, create a new thing. And the type of thing that we're going to create is going to be a listing. And now it's going to create a listing just on its own. So if I preview this, and I click this button, Create Volunteer Listing, you won't see much happen, but we did actually just create our first listing. I can show you by going into our Data tab and going onto this App Data tab over here, clicking on All Listings, so all of the different data types we have are listed here. And this is actually going to show me what our database actually looks like right now. And we have one entry that was created just moments ago. It doesn't have any information because we didn't connect those inputs to this listing when it was created. The only thing it has by default is a created date, a date when it was last modified. So if I make changes to this data type later, that's going to be reflected in the modified date. And it also has a unique ID. So that's a long string. So by default, Bubble creates or generates this unique ID for every new element that's created. And you don't need to worry about that. Now, I could, of course, add all of the information manually into this database, but the whole point is that we're trying to make it really easy for somebody to create a listing. And so me, as the app builder, I don't want to have to be putting in that information myself. I want that to be done automatically. So the next step for us is to actually physically connect up those inputs to the fields within the data type. So these are those sheets within the folder now. So the listing, because we're creating a type listing, it'll already give us a list of all of the possible fields that we can set. And we'll start with position title because that's the one that we created. So I want to set the position title of this listing to be equal to whatever the user has just typed in that position title input on the page. So I have this incredibly powerful concept called insert dynamic data. And that means that I don't have to type manually the name of the title, but I can just take it automatically from whatever's in the input. So now that I've clicked insert dynamic data, I want to find that input in this list. And down here I have a whole bunch of elements, and I have one called position title. That's very handy that it's called position title, because otherwise I might not know what it is. And I'll show you how it's done, how Bubble's handled that in a second. We want to set it to the value of that input. The position title for the input was automatically created by Bubble because we changed this placeholder. But by default, an input won't have such a intuitive title. It'll just be called something like input C. And that can make linking up your inputs very confusing later on. So you do want to, and this is another good practice tip, almost actually an essential practice, that you just have to do this from the beginning. You just have to make this a habit, or you're going to make your life really hard and you're going to spend a lot of time being frustrated and lost in your app. So what you have to do is you have to name your elements, or at least you have to name your inputs, and you should really name your groups as well. So input organization is pretty self-explanatory. This one, multi-line input, what are all the things? That's, we don't have that many inputs, so for now we're gonna probably know what this is. But as our apps get bigger, we want to name things in a way that's going to be very intuitive, very easy for us to find them later on. So I'll call this multi-line input tasks for now, and just try to keep it a little bit synchronous with what we've labeled the fields in our database. How many hours does a position require? Instead of drop down A, let's call this drop down time commitment. The image picture uploader, this is the picture uploader listing image, let's say. And the search box A is a shit name, it must be said. Search box location is a lot more intuitive. So now when we go back into our workflow tab and we're gonna link up the rest of these fields, it should be pretty simple for us. The organization, that's gonna be link to our input organization, which Bubble already set for us. But the other ones, image, we can now set that to picture uploader listing image. That makes sense. Location, search box location. We have, of course, tasks, and our multi-line input tasks will take care of that. Oh, is valid, nope, value. And time commitment, we obviously want to go to our drop down time commitments value. So let's just see whether this is doing anything at this stage. If we preview this and we create a new listing, we already know that our listing is being created upon this click. Now we want to know whether it's actually saving any of this information that the user's entered into the data type. So I'll plug in some info that I prepared earlier just to see where this works. So position title, website maintenance. The tasks are publish blogs, the organization, ecosystem, restoration camps, how many hours does the position require, between 3 and 10 hours a week, let's say. The image, this one that I already prepared, where is it located? Let's locate it in Madrid, Spain. This is actually inspired by a real example, which is in Spain, but it's not in Madrid. Now, if I click this create volunteer listing, surprise, surprise, nothing spectacular happens because we haven't told the program to do anything spectacular once this button is clicked, but we will get to that. We just want to know whether that action did actually create a entry in our database. So if we go back to our app data, we don't see anything yet, but that's because we need to refresh this database view. So we click down here on refresh data and still don't see anything. And because we still don't see anything, we should have a look at what's going wrong at the moment in which we take this action. So quick intro now to the debugger. The debugger is created by default at the bottom of your preview window when you're in development mode. Talk about the difference in development and live modes in a different video, but whenever you're editing your app, you're doing so in development mode. We can click this step-by-step value down here to actually have our program do literally what it says here, is to move through each subsequent step of the workflow in time as we tell it to, and it's also going to give us a bit of information about what it's doing at each step. So I've clicked step by step. Let's try this again, create volunteer listing, and now we get a little overview of our actual workflow. So button create volunteer is clicked, cool. Then we want to do something else. We want to create a new listing, and it's telling us now what is all the information that it's going to plug into these data fields. So position title does actually have website maintenance, as it should. Ecosystem restoration camp. This all looks fine. If we click on any of these, Bubble will tell us how it's getting this information. So it's getting website maintenance from this source, input position titles value, which is website maintenance. So that's all acting as it should. Yet when I go to the database, I don't actually see anything. Now, this could be just a bug, and I think it is. So if I refresh this, I refresh my entire editor, and I go back into my app data, back into my listings. Now you'll see that I have 2 entries for both button clicks, both with the information that I already provided. So sometimes that can happen. Just clicking refresh won't actually show you the latest bits of data. It happens to me very rarely. I'm quite surprised that it happened now while shooting this video. But it is something to be aware of. If you don't see your bits of data showing up here when you expect it to, just refresh your editor, and hopefully they show up. So here we have the listing that we just created. Both of them, we'll delete one by clicking this checkbox here, clicking delete over here. And that's all fine and dandy. So this is working just great. The only sort of issue that we have is that it's not really intuitive for the user to know that their listing has actually been created. Once we click this, nothing happens. The page looks exactly the same. So there's 2 things that we should do to this page to change that. One is that once this button is clicked, we should erase all of the information in all of these inputs. So we should reset the inputs. And the other is that we should show some kind of notification or alert that says to the user, hey, we just created your listing. So both of those things, because they are behavior, are going to be covered in the workflow tab. And we go back to this workflow that we already created, and we simply just add them as other steps that we want Bubble to do once it's created this first listing. So after creating that new listing, what we'll ask it to do is reset the inputs. So you go down to element actions, and you have over here under input, reset inputs. And you'll see the action actually says reset relevant inputs. Bubble does a pretty good job of knowing what inputs it is that you want to reset. So because these two actions are linked in the same workflow, this action just knows that it's going to be the inputs in this preceding action that it has to reset. And that can even work in long workflows. The other thing is we want to create an alert or show an alert. An alert is an element that we haven't created yet. So it's under here under visual elements, and we can drag it on the screen like so. We can say, your listing has been created as its text. We can quickly change its style to be a success alert, and we can set it by default to appear at the top of the window. So now that that's created, we go back into our workflow tab, and we want to show that alert, because by default, even though it's over here, big and bold and green, it doesn't actually show up in our application. Alerts are hidden by default. So we need to tell the application to actually show the alert. So we'll do that in our workflow tab. We will add another action. It's another element action because it's related to the alert. And we actually have an action just for specific to alerts down here called show message. And it's automatically selected our element that we just created, the alert element, because it's the only one that we have. If you had more, then you would have to choose it from down here. And we can just change a few parameters regarding its length. So in milliseconds, how long do you want this alert to take to fade in? It won't just appear, it can fade in over time. How long do you want it to stay on the page? And then how long do you want it to take to fade away? So let's see how that works now. If we refresh our preview window, and let's input some different info that I've also prepared earlier. The tasks are gonna be doing this kind of stuff, and just to make this a little interesting, let's put all these on a new line. Friends of the Earth, Berlin, let's say. Less than 3 hours a week. Because it's Friends of the Earth Berlin, should probably be in Berlin. Upload an image, and I think I don't know which one is my social media. I'll just choose this one. Doesn't really matter. Okay, now if I click volunteer listing, boom, two things happens. Alert up here, all of the inputs have been reset. You saw that the alert faded in and it faded out. So this has worked perfectly. Now we have the ability for our users, if we refresh this, now it's working perfect. We have the ability for our users to just plug their own information into the inputs that we've given them, and now we're collecting that in a structured way and storing it and holding on to that information for them. The next logical step is to actually do something with that information. And since we're building a marketplace app, the logical thing to do is to provide that information to the people who might want to use it. Who might want to buy it, or in our case, they might want to apply based on that information, apply for the position. So if we look one more time at our diagram, this is how information is taken from our database, from our filing cabinets, and then presented out into the outside world. So we want to have some various visual elements that are essentially just surrogates. They're just empty. We don't want to plug any static information into them like we did when we were creating the first page, that said our red line and what is the name of your organization, all this kind of stuff. We want it to display information dynamically. So what that means is we want it to display information that it gets from the database based on some search parameters. So based on where we've told it to look, essentially. And the way it does that is by first sending that data type, in our case the listing, to a particular group. And that group is like the window of a house. So, inside the house, we've got those filing cabinets that's storing all of that information in a structured way. And now we want to take that information and show it to other people, show it to the rest of the world. So we might go into our filing cabinet, pick up one folder, pick up one volunteer listing, and carry it over to the window. And then sort of just hold up the folder and all the different sheets and display it out to the rest of the world. But first we need to have a window, right? We need to have some window that's gonna be able to show that particular information through it. And groups function just like those windows. So they're there kind of waiting to display information through them. But until you display information through them, they're not interesting unto themselves. Until you actually hold something out to show out that window, nobody on the other side is going to see anything. And let's just assume that they can't see into the house for the sake of this pretty silly analogy, but that kind of captures it. So we need to first configure a group to act as that window for our data to display itself to, in our case, people looking for volunteer listings. So let's do that now. We'll go into our index page again, and we'll create a group to act as that window. And we can tell it, we'll quickly name it as well, group display listing. And we want it to expect to display a listing, of course, as its type of content. And now we need to tell it, well, where to look to get that listing in the first place. Where is that information going to come from? And that's what the data source entry is from. In our case, it's rather simple right now. We just want it to look into all of the listings that we have and just display all of the listings back out to the viewer, to the user. So we can say do a search for, which is basically just going to say that, look at all of the listings that we have. So do a search for all of the listings that we have. You can add a particular constraints, only look for listings in Berlin or only look for listings from this particular organization. We don't care about any of that for now. We just want all of the listings. We can even sort them by their created date. And then if we close this, we get this little message here. The data you're displaying is a list of listings while it should be a single listing. Click to use the first item of this list. So what's actually happening here that's causing a bit of a problem for us is that we have two valid listings in our database. If we have a look now, we have this one from Berlin and this one from Madrid. We can delete this one for now to keep things simple. And both of these, we've told our application to look in our database and get all of the listings. So it's coming back with these two listings and it's trying to display both of them through the same group, through the same window. And this is a group that's only configured to show one listing at a time. It can't hold two different or two or more listings at the same time. It can't do it. It's against its own laws of physics, so to speak. So what it's saying by click to use the first item of this list is choose. Take one of these listings. I don't care one. I'm just going to suggest you take the first one that's easiest. So just to show you how that would work, you know, we search for listings, take the first item, okay, cool. Now that we have that window configured to take a listing, we can give it some kind of way of displaying the information through it. So I've been using the analogy of a window. It's probably a little bit more like a you know, like a polystyrene wall or something that you can't really see in, that you need to actually create the little lenses to see through. And so at the moment you have the data kind of just hiding behind this thin wall, and we need to create the lenses for it to look out onto the world. So because we have a lot of text fields within our listing, we can start by creating a text visual element and tell that visual element that rather than just saying, you know, that it's from Friends of the Earth, you know, we can't plug that information in for every single listing that we create. So we want to take it dynamically. So we can say insert dynamic data, take the parent group listings. So the parent group is the group which this text element is inside of, the child of. Take the parent group's listing and give me the position title field of that data type. That's all it's doing. And I'll put a little border around this group so you can see it more easily. So it can change down here, border styles, make a solid border. And now if I preview this, all right, I see website maintenance. So that's literally going into the database and it's finding this entry here, the first one that we created because we sorted them by created date, and it's plugging that into our group, and it's telling that group, and then there's a text element in that group that's saying, just give me the position title field of that data type and present it out to the world. So that's what this is doing, but obviously this is not going to be very useful because we can only show one listing here. So how do we actually show, like when you would expect any kind of listings board, or, you know, on Airbnb you have lists of all different types of homes and experiences. If you go onto a job board online, you don't just see one job, you see tons of different jobs. So we want the same kind of functionality to work here, obviously. So a group is not what we need, but a repeating group, that kind of sounds like we might be more on the right track. So a repeating group is literally just a list of groups. It's a group that repeats over and over and over and over again. So I can just delete this for now, keep things simple, and drag my repeating group over. And the nice thing about repeating groups is that unlike before when we tried to get all of the listings from the database, so the database fed us multiple listings, a list of listings, a repeating group is set up to expect a list of something. And that's why it has these sort of cells, just like an Excel sheet or something. Each one of these is its own little group, and it'll just take all of the information that it receives and plug it in one by one. So probably rather than just talking about it, I should just show you. I'm going to tell the repeating group to expect a type of called listing. Like before, we'll tell it to look into the database and just give me all the listings you have. Give me all the listings. Close that up. And do like we did before. Text element here that says the current, this time current cells listing. So that's just this cell here, and give me the listing that you find, give me its position title. And let's try to make this a little clean. Position title can go up there. And I'll even add a little text thing here for the organization. Let's say current sales listing organization. Now, if we preview that, we go down, we see both of our listings that we've created sitting here in this repeating group. So we have done, 80% of the lifting here. We've set up the ability for one user to input their own information. We've taken it, we've structured it, and then we've provided the functionality to feed that information back out to the outside world. And those two groups, the ones who are giving us the information and the ones who are seeing the information, might be two different types of people, two different types of incentives. So as a mediator between them, right, which is what a marketplace is, we're right on the right track. One other thing to note at this stage is that if we actually create a new listing, if we create this listing, it'll appear immediately down here. So that's how we can be 100% sure that this is working. The sort of second part of this tutorial, I want to cover how to tidy this whole website up a little bit so it actually feels a little bit more like a web application or like a website, because right now it's all on one page. That's not very intuitive. We're not going to go heavy on the design, but we at least want to put this section where we're showing listings in a different section of the website than when people input the listings. So that kind of hints that we might need a couple of different pages. So let's do that now. At the moment, we've been working all within the index page. That's where we've done everything. Now we're going to create a new page. To do that, you click up here, which lists, so it has a menu where you list all of your pages, and we can go add a new page. And we'll call that one listings. Now you can duplicate a page that you already have. So to copy index and make a new duplicate of index and call it listings, I would do this. We'll keep it blank for now. And here we have it, a new page, which if I double click says listings. So that's all cool. First order of business, take our repeating group and pass it through to listings. And now we have, if we preview this, a new page just for listings. And that's cool. Obviously we want to link these two pages together so you can get from one to the other. So the traditional way that users expect is to have a header, and in that header you have some buttons, and by clicking on those buttons you can navigate around a website. So a header for us can just look like a group, and we can call that group header. And in that header, we can create a button. We're now on the listings page. We can create a button, and we'll change the style to be a no background button. Styles I haven't talked about, just as a really brief overview. If you go into the styles tab, you will see all of these styles for every type of element, which you can then change. So, I can search, filter all the elements by their type. So I've got button here. I can go into my no background button. I see that it's red. I probably want to keep it red, but let's just make it maybe a different font. Usually, there we go. And maybe just make it bold as well, and make it 16. And that'll re-replicate it here. And for all subsequent buttons that I assign the no background button style. So it's a really easy way to make bulk changes to the look and feel of your app by just simply changing one thing, and that's within the style. So you do want to get into the habit of using styles, but that's more diving into the UI design and UX design, user experience design, sorry. UI is user interface, UX is user experience. Those are the jargon words in this industry. And so we'll add a title to this button. We'll call it, create a volunteer listing, let's say. And it's quite long, and we need to make this button a little bit bigger, but it is going to look a little tidy because button styles by default have this sort of feature which if I hover over it, something will happen so that I know it's a button. We've already accounted that with the create a volunteer listing button, but we didn't talk about that. So this feature, how you can say, when this volunteer listing button is hovered, underline it, that's what we call a conditional. And conditionals are really the last major piece of the puzzle that I want to introduce here. Because conditionals allow you to make your page interactive in a different way than you do with workflows, but really just expand the range of things that you can that you can do with your website quite dramatically. I'll quickly go over it here. In the Styles tab, where we have this no background button, I can also do it within any element itself. We have this conditional tab. A conditional tab is where you say things like, if a user is hovering this element, then underline it. And I'll show you exactly what that looks like by going back into the Styles tab, where we have a pre-configured condition that says exactly that. When this button is hovered, underline. And if I was just to delete this, this is the way that you set up a conditional. You choose from a set of options. So when this button, and I can do things like when it's clicked. In our case, of course, we just want to make it hovered. And here I tell the application all the things that I want the button to do when the button is hovered. So at the moment here we've got underline. I might want to get rid of that, and I might want to instead change the font color slightly. Let's make it a bit lighter. And I could also maybe make it a little bit bigger. And now if I preview what that looks like, okay, it's working, but it's actually making it too big for the size of the button that we created. So that's why it's looking a little bit weird. If I just make this slightly bigger, it should be fixed. And here we go, create a volunteer listing. Now, we want to tie this up to navigating to the index page of our app, obviously, because right now that button's not doing anything. So, as you might already now hopefully expect, we want to add a workflow to trigger when this button is clicked. So, the action that we want to look for when we're moving between different pages of our app is under navigation, aptly named, and we can select the go to page action, and over in the dialog box we choose which page we want to go to, in our case index, and data to send more parameters to page. That is some functionality that we're not going to cover in this lesson, but it is very important, especially data to send can be very important. So now if we preview this and we go create a volunteer listing, voila, there we are. We have navigated from one page to the other. Obviously on our index page we don't have a header, so that's what we want to create. So one way we could do that is to copy this header that we've already created. We could go over to index, and now I want to create some space for my header, so I'm glad we grouped all of these things earlier. So I'm going to drag that down a little bit, and I'm going to paste the header, and I probably want to add another button, and instead of doing that, I'll copy, control drag the one I already have, view listings, or view opportunities. No, view listings. We'll keep the same kind of text. Volunteer listings. And with this one, I can also, of course, create a action to go to page listings. And by previewing that, I end up with a new button that's going to take me back. And here we are again. Only problem now is that the header looks a little bit different. And this, you can imagine this getting a little bit more complex the more buttons that we have. Right now it doesn't matter so much because on the listings page, we only really want to have a button to go to the create a volunteer listings page. But if we had another page like About Us or Contact Us or these kind of things, well, we don't want to have to be adding and removing buttons manually on every individual page. Depending on what that page is for, that's going to take us a lot of time. So instead, we want to use something called a repeatable element, or reusable element rather. And that allows us to just create a particular element once and use it across multiple pages. So one way to create a reusable element is to right click and go convert into a reusable element. And we want to call this the red line header. And the reason why I'm calling it the red line header is because we already have another element called header that Bubbles created. So this is a page where you just edit the reusable element, and it shows up like any other page, except it's just down here in the section called Reusable Elements. And this is why I wanted to call it red line header, is because Bubble by default will create a header for you. It'll also create a footer. It'll also create a pop-up for allowing users to create an account in your application, which we're not going to cover today. And this is what the Bubble header looks like. So you can add things to it. But I wanted to show you how to actually create one from scratch. The other way is to add a new reusable element down here, and you can create one just in the same way you would create a page. And I can change the size of the reusable element by basically just dragging the canvas here. The other way that I can change the size is actually with these width and height controls. So if I made that 120, I would just double the size. And these controls go for any element. You can change the size of a button also by doing that. And also, unlike the repeating group, I can change the position. I can change the X and Y coordinates instead of dragging things and trying to line them up that way. The other way that's very handy to drag things, to move things around, is with the arrow keys, and then you can make very granular changes. But anyway, not to digress too much, let's start by dragging these two elements around over here, and let's check that the workflows are there. So our view volunteer listings is working, but our create a volunteer listing doesn't have any logic to it. So I want to add that workflow. Go to index. Now I've got this red line header. It's a reusable element. And you can't preview this page because reusable elements don't exist like pages. You need to actually put them onto a page. So if I go onto my index, here I have the original group header. I can delete this, and I can instead go down to the bottom of my elements menu and grab red line header from under the reusable elements section, and I can just drag it across. It'll automatically go to the correct size. If you change the size elsewhere, if you change the size within the page, so say I want to make this, it's 963 is a little too small. I still want to make this not 1, that wouldn't be very useful, but 1000. Sometimes this can be a little fiddly. 1000. Then on my index page, I have this reusable header. I can reset it to its dimensions, and that didn't seem to do a lot, but nonetheless, there you have it. Now if I preview this page, I have my reusable element up the top, and if I add it also to my listings page, so delete this, add it also here. Preview that again. Voila, here we have the two buttons that we're looking for on both of our pages. And if we make a change in one, if in the element, if we say, okay, I want to make this green for some reason, then that'll be replicated anywhere that you can find the reusable element. So it's on both pages there. Just to dive deeper into conditionals one more time, it might be nice because when we're on any one of the pages that we've already created in our app, we don't have a really good indication of what page that we're on. And adding a condition to these buttons so they also kind of behave as page headers might be a nice way to do that. So if we're just thinking through how the logic of that might work, if we were on the volunteer listings page, maybe we want the volunteer listings button to appear unavailable in some way. And we've actually got it to kind of fade upon hover, which is actually the inverse of what you would think would be intuitive. Faded usually means, out of order, can't use this. So let's try and make this faded, or sort of seem like it's not possible to click on the button when in fact we're on the page that relates to that button. So we can do that by going into the conditional tab of our buttons. And first let's change the style to get rid of this font color. We'll just say when it's hovered, we'll make it bigger. And we'll add another condition called define, by clicking define another condition. And we'll use this thing that's called when the current page name is listings. And then what I want you to do is I want you to be smaller. Yeah, 16 feels okay. Let's try that. I want you to be faded quite a lot. And I also don't want anything to change. In fact, we've still got this. I don't want the button to change when it's hovered, because that'll still make it seem like it's interactive. So if we preview this, yeah, view volunteer listings is faded just like it should be. And we can double check that that's actually why it's happening, because if we use the inspect tool in our debugger, this actually allows us to click on any element. We can also find it by searching for the element here. But if we click on it, we get all of this information about the element. This is the font color, all of these conditions that we can set within the elements dialog box. But most important for us right now is we can see an overview of all the conditions. And we can see that condition 1, this button is hovered, is red, meaning it's not met. That won't show up even if we do hover over. But the condition 2 is green, meaning this condition is met, because the current page name is listings. And that's why it is faded. Create a volunteer listing is, we want the same functionality to work for that, because if we go over, our view volunteer listings is back to normal, but our create a volunteer listing is still reacting to our hover, even though we're on the create a volunteer listing page. So we'll want to create this functionality within this button. An easy way, rather than going down here and going when, I can search for the term, when page name is index. I could alternatively right click on a similar condition, copy it, and paste. And then I just have to change this to say index. And what did we change this to? We made it, this color, which it should already be, and about that kind of transparency. And we also had the font size be 16. We have to change that ourselves. And now, if we go back to our application, it is indeed hidden, which is what we want. Still looks like we can click it. That's something that we can't change right now. But at least now we have this nice change in how the things look. And obviously you can customize this to your heart's content to look, completely different than how we've done it here, and probably a lot better. This is just a very quick example. So the very last thing that we need to do to make this app even functional in the most basic sense is to obviously have some way for people to reply to volunteer listings. See, we've still got our repeating group here, which we should delete. But if we go to our listings page, there's not that much that we can do as a user. We can see an overview, and this is still pretty basic. We can also put our image in here by grabbing an image element and setting that dynamic to display dynamically the current sales listings image, and all the other fields that we would want to have in here as well. But I can't do anything from here, right? I know this exists, but when I want to do website maintenance for the ecosystem restoration camp, but I can't contact them in any way. So we want now a way for people to be able to contact their organizations. To do that, we need to decide on a way that they will be in contact. And while, it's entirely possible to build out a internal messaging system for this application, for the purposes of keeping it simple, I'm going to show you how to set up emails to be sent based on within certain workflows. And for that to work, we actually need a way to collect the email address of the person creating a listing, which we haven't got yet. So if I go down here and make this one your email, and the placeholder can just be like bob@examplemail.com. And I want to change the workflow here to also save an email field within our listing data type. Now, we don't have an email field already configured, and we could go into our database and create it, just like we created the image, location, task, etc. Bubble also allows us to create it directly from this menu here. So I can go down here, so create new fields. I can call it email, and I can set it to be text. And I can set this to take whatever the value of this email is, and I should call it input email. And one other thing I'll show you real quick is I can set the input to expect certain type of content. The moment we've got it set for text, I can get it set to expect an email. And what that will do is if I, create volunteer listing. If I type in sort of, gavtheman.com, that's not a valid email, and this email box will stay red. And in fact, we get a little dialog box here telling us why it's red. So that's actually invalid, and the workflow will reject saving this field until we fix that. So if I just put a little @ in there, then it works. And Now you might also have made the connection that these blue that are coming over, this is that's coming around the input field rather. That's a conditional. That's a built-in conditional for the style of standard input. When this input is focused, which means that the user has clicked within the input, then do all of these things. And that's what we're seeing here when we click between these inputs. So let's quickly just create a new listing with an email just so we can actually see this in action. And we create that, and I don't actually know if we didn't connect up the email input. So that data that we just created, if we refresh it, it's got everything, but doesn't have an email. So let me skip past this. I'll add all this back. Okay, so I just went through the trouble of creating that listing again. Now, with hopefully the email in there, yep. And I'll delete the one that we made a mistake with before. And this kind of highlights something important about developing in general is you should try as much as you can to just change one thing at a time and then test. So, along the way we've been previewing a lot. That's very good practice. Change something, preview, see that it works, and then change something else. Because if you make a lot of changes all at the same time and then preview, and then something doesn't work, your ability to find out what exactly is making it not work is going to be hindered by the sheer amount of possibilities as to what it could be. And the way that they interact with one another is also a lot harder to track. 3 things interacting with 3 other things is that's 3 times 3 possibilities, 9 possibilities. And if you just have one thing that you've changed and it doesn't work, well, it can only be that one thing that's made it faulty, if in fact it was working beforehand. So that's just make it incremental changes to your app and testing. It's very good practice. So now we have this this new listing with an email address, and it's not showing up with a photo. My image didn't load, so I'm going to add it manually, which is what you might have to do as an admin of your site. Add it manually, and now it should pop up. Yep. Now we want to wait for a potential volunteer who's seen your listing to click on it and have that lead them through a short process where they can actually contact or apply for that listing. So the way that we'll do that is rather than create another button or something here, we'll actually make this whole section a button that you can click on. The whole cell can act like a button. So the way that we should do that is first, and I'll just make this a little smaller so it stays clean. So first put all these elements in a group, which we should have done at the beginning. Let's make it a little bigger on the sides, and let's give it a little background as well. Say background style, let's just make it slightly darker gray. And to make it act like a button, we want something to happen when it's hovered, just like we did with our buttons up here in the header. So let's say when this group, the group that we're editing, is hovered, change the background color to be a slightly lighter version of gray. And to bring this out even more, we can even say box shadow style, which will allow us to add a little bit of an outer shadow. Box shadow style is what we've set up here. We can also change the spread radius of that to be something like 4. And if we preview that, 4 pixels that is, now we go over it and we get this little highlight and offset, which this really looks terrible. It looks extremely ugly, but it works functionally. It works. So we can, we can play around with the design, and we can maybe we'll get rid of this offset, and we'll make the box smaller, and we'll add all kinds of other little design elements to make this look nicer. For now, we just want to see that it works as a conditional, which it is. And now we want to make this a button. So if we click on it, something happens. So the last little mini page, rather, that we need to create is, it's a flow that somebody goes through when they want to apply or contact somebody who's hosting a volunteer opportunity. And the way that we'll do that is with a new type of element that we haven't explored yet, the pop-up. And pop-ups aren't just good for pissing people off asking for permissions to save cookies to your browser. They also can work as a nice little avenue to direct your users for particular purposes. So in our case, to apply for a listing, we don't have to create a whole new page for this. We can just direct the user through sort of a side street within a page that we've already created to get them to apply for a volunteer opportunity. So call it pop-up apply, and let's just add some text to it just so we can see it. Apply for this opportunity. Make it a bit bigger, make it a heading. And pop-ups, like alerts, aren't visible by default on a page. So if we preview this, we won't actually see the pop-up anywhere. We have to explicitly tell the application to show the pop-up. So what we can do is launch a workflow from clicking on this group, which is going to act like a button. If we say start edit workflow, click here to add an action. We want this to show pop-up apply. And now if we click this, boom, it works. You can click escape as a user to get out of that. And now we have the first sort of step. The next thing is to have this pop-up display information dynamically based upon the particular listing that we clicked on. So pop-ups, because they're a group, can actually have a data source, and that means that they can work just like this the window or the wall that I was talking about before, and be ready to display information through it. So we can set the type of content to be a listing. The data source, though, isn't going to be that useful for us, because we could do another independent search right now and pull up a random listing. We could get all the listings from the database and just pick the first one or pick the third one or something like that. But the whole point is that we want to click on write articles and blogs, for example, and have the information about the write articles and blogs listings appear in that pop-up. So that's not going to happen automatically. Like everything with programming, we have to tell the program what to do explicitly. It's very, very stupid until we tell it what to do. So we've got this show pop-up apply. That's not going to suffice on its own. What we want is something before that action, where we take the data within this group listing that we've clicked on and we push it through to the pop-up. So right here is the connection point where we can add the display data action, and where we want to display the data is in the pop-up apply, and which data we want to display is this group, and that's been the group listing that we've clicked. This always refers to the element related to the event which triggered the workflow. This group's listing, and how we can test that is by, instead of saying apply for this opportunity, say apply for,
and then plug in the dynamic data, parent groups listing, so this Popups listing, position title. Now, if we preview that, write articles and blogs, right, apply for write articles and blogs, perfect. Now all we need to do is collect the information from the person who's applying and somehow send that information off to the creator of the volunteer opportunity. So how to do that? We need some more input fields because we probably want to send to the volunteer position creators. We probably want to send the name of the person applying. So just to make this a bit quicker here, I'll go sort of your name. You know, we could also say your prior, relevant experience. And just for now, that's all we'll put in because we don't need to make this too complicated. I will convert this, replace this with a multi-line input so that they can actually add a fair bit about their prior experience. Your prior relevant experience. And also a way for them to be contacted. Let's actually just copy this over to there. You'll see now that the snap to edges is a bit handier. Your email, and we can set that to be content format. Email, multi-line input, we'll change the name of this, prior experience. So I'm just whizzing through now because you know all of this already. And now we need a way to trigger the sending of this information, so we can add a button that says apply for position. Now, let's make this pop a bit longer. Now we want to configure this button to do something, and we already decided that the way we were going to put these two people in contact, the volunteer position host and the one who's applying, was via email. So there's a real handy action under under email, which Bubble has really got some built-in functionality for sending emails, called send email. And now we can enter dynamically the information of the volunteer host to let them know that somebody has applied for their position. So we can say to the parent group's listings email, we'll say, you know, this is coming from us, the organization, so our red line. You can say the subject, someone just applied for your listing. And now we can add the body also using some dynamic data. So hello, insert dynamic data, parent groups listings. Well, let's just put the organization. You have to be careful with, it's a little difficult to see how these emails are going to be formatted. This, where the cursor is right now, is actually directly after parent group's organization as a dynamic link. So I put the comma there, then I'll enter again, and then I'll add some body text. I'll say, you know, they input your name's value, so that's this input here. The person who's applying has just applied for your position, and then they can add the parent group's listings position title again just to remind them. Their prior experience is colon again, and we can even put this on a new line. There's ways to make this read much more human because we can make this dynamic information input, what's that prior experience value? We can make this all lowercase by default. So we could say, you know, their prior experience is, and then without the colon, have it in lowercase. But that might read a little bit weird if they started off their by telling their experience like, I have prior experience in, because then the sentence would read, their prior experience is, I have prior experience in. So you really need to think about the way that you want to configure these messages right from the point of time on which you're creating the inputs, or rather when you're prompting the user for information. So that you can get it in a format that then you can easily use later on. So for now, we'll do it in this slightly more robotic name. So you can contact them at another colon, and then we can put the email of the person. Cheers, our red line. And this rich text editor also gives you a little bit of an overview, so you can see how it would actually look. So that's, you know, all the spaces and the line breaks are where we want them. So that's all fine. And this is going to send to the email of the parent group's listing. And you'll remember that we didn't really put in a very valid email. We put in actually a very strange one. And the reason for that is I was trying to think ahead, because I have this service in my mind, Mailinator, and Mailinator is really good for testing sending of emails via Bubble, because they're a service that just has a whole bunch of public email boxes, basically any email box that you want, with the Mailinator @Mailinator domain. And these are just public inboxes that you can just basically create and then enter and just view all the emails that come in. So that's really handy for us, because we don't need to go through all this hassle of creating, you know, special Gmail accounts or anything like that. We can just take something like October example, something that other people won't have. Because the thing with this, if I just put like Bob at mailinator.com, that email box is public, and there'll be tons of other random emails in there. So just to keep it clean, October example 17 sounds like a pretty fair one. If I look in there, I don't know why I'm doing 17. That's not the year. That's not the year. Anyway, I'm living in the past, man. We want to make sure that this listings email is going to take the right email and pass it through to Mailinator. So, you know, I have October 17 at example.com. I'll just change that to be October 17 and it will be at mailinator.com. I can, in fact, copy it just to be safe. Mailinator.com. Save that. Okay, now everything seems to be in order. I've got this pop-up, I've got a workflow, it's going to send information to the listings email. Okay, let's see. Let's see if this works. The one that I want is the fundraising one, I believe. So that's the only one that has a valid email, the one that we just added. So click on that, apply for fundraising. Okay, Frank Sinatra. And, you know, this one doesn't really matter, at mail.com, so we're not sending anything to them yet. Have had several platinum albums. I actually don't know if he has. You'd think he would have. Okay, apply for this position. This little blue bars, something's just happened. We haven't obviously set an alert or anything. We haven't reset the inputs, but something's happened because I saw the blue bar go across. And if we go into Mailinator, voila, from our red line, subject justified for your listing, let's click into it. Hello, Code Rude. Frank Sinatra has just applied for your position, fundraising. That would be an interesting email to receive. Their prior experience is, have had several platinum albums, etc., etc. Their email. So it's worked perfectly. It's worked exactly as we've configured it. And now one side of this connection has been made. CodeRoot has the ability now to contact Frank if they want, and obviously you can plug much more relevant information into this email. You can, you could have fields that are explaining not just their prior experience, but what they do for work, why they're interested in the position in the first place, when can they start, anything really. And that's maybe a lot of information to pass through an email, but it's at least, that's the crudest way for them to make contact. And but Bubble can support to do a lot more through messaging and this kind of stuff. But that's a story for another day. So for now, let's add another email, just for the sake of argument. And in fact, I can just also plug this in up here. And no matter what I plug into the input, this workflow is going to send to octoberexample@mail.com, which is quite fine, because when we're ready to really link this up, we just delete that and we just say to input your email. And if it wasn't clear, what we're doing here is creating an email to send to the person who's applying for the position now. So, but for testing, we can keep this as it was. Our red name. We've sent your message to, and then the organization, parent groups, listings, position title, no, not position title, organization. And then you can change this. Hello, your name, it's value. Let's just delete all of this. Something like, we've just passed on your message, applying for the position. Yeah, you get the idea. The parent group's listings, position, title. And then you can make that message obviously as customized as you want. We'll get back to you, they'll get back to you within 7 days, etc., etc., etc. Let's clean this up. Let's say we'll reset the data in that group in the entire pop-up, which is going to achieve the same purpose as resetting the relevant inputs. You can also just reset all of the inputs within a particular group, and we can hide the pop-up too. And what you end up with is, you can say, George at mail. That doesn't really matter what I put in here, because we're going to be sent to Mailinator. Loads of cool experiences. Love the planet and stuff. Don't mean to sound sarcastic there. Climate change is the most important thing. It's really hard to see it any other way. So regardless, here we go. Sent. The inputs have all reset. Mailinator should have received something else. We've sent your message to CodeRoot. That's this message. And someone just applied for your position, fundraising. That's the new information from George. So now we have a fully functioning, albeit a little bit crude, website where somebody can plug in information about their volunteer listings and other people can apply for it. Just to top it all off, we might want to put a little message, a little logo up here. That didn't work quite correctly. And let's upload this nice little logo. And that's the final touch, really. So you can see that it works. You can see that we've been able to connect people on two different sides of the marketplace and have them either create information on our marketplace or respond to the information that others have created on our marketplace. The more advanced functionality is to have them be able to message each other through the platform directly, be able to log in and manage their profile and manage what they've applied for and this kind of thing. And if we were going to be actually selling things, which for the marketplace we're not, then we could also integrate payment functionality. But for now, that just about covers it. I'll be creating more of these videos where we build upon the functionality of what we've created here today. So we'll do more advanced things like create that messaging system that I just talked about, or like some more advanced conditional statements that make the whole app feel a lot smoother from a user experience point of view. So I'd love to hear what you think about this video. I know it's been a very long one, but my intention was to try to encapsulate all of the foundations within one video so that hopefully this will suffice on its own, and you can go and learn. You can go and learn yourself via the reference guide of Bubble, via asking questions in the forum. If you don't know already, the last thing I will tell you is that if you want to know how anything works within Bubble, if you hover it, you'll see the C reference pop up. And if you click that, then the reference guide for Bubble will open and it will automatically scroll to the section of the guide that is relevant for you. So that's the last thing I'm going to tell you. Get building. Hope this video has been helpful. And thanks so much for paying attention and listening. See you later.